Hi there, it's Alexandra from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog with the January garden tour. We're having a relatively mild January so far, with temperatures in single digits Celsius, which is probably about 48–50 degrees Fahrenheit, and just the occasional frost. So the weeds are growing, which means that of course you have to keep an eye on that. We have to go out and do weeding, which I hadn't kind of planned for this time of year. Because the garden is really quite bare at this time of year, I think it's a great time of year to talk about why we chose this particular shape and style of garden. Because if you're doing any changes in your garden, or you've acquired a new garden recently, you might find that helpful. We bought this house 15 years ago, and it actually had a very beautiful mature garden. It was incredibly well designed and very well looked after, and I knew nothing about gardening in those days, so I was really the last person to take it on. It just grew very wild under my initial care. But also, the main thing is, it wasn't our garden. And eventually, about 8 or 9 years ago, we decided we needed to have a garden that was right for us. So a friend of ours, Matt Jackson of Landscape and Heritage, a landscape and garden consultant who has previously run several National Trust gardens and also Doddington Place gardens in Kent, said that he would help us with ideas. And to tell us when our ideas were perhaps not realistic or would be too expensive, and to generally sort of say, yes, that will work, and no, that won't. So we all sat down around our kitchen table, and it was literally started off on the back of an envelope. And our basic premise was that we wanted the architecture of the house and the design of the garden to be quite similar. Now, our predecessors had actually done the opposite. The house is very square. We have 4 rooms on each floor and 2 floors, and it's Georgian. It's quite a simple and plain house with quite simple detailing. And our predecessors had decided to balance that out with curved beds, and that's actually a very valid design approach, and it's definitely one to consider. But it's also worth considering actually echoing the geometric walls and the house with geometric gardens, and we decided to go for the latter. Our garden sloped, and it is quite tricky to mow a sloping lawn, and we decided we would rather terrace it. Now, obviously that is quite expensive, so it was the main investment was getting landscapers in to terrace the garden. But we really like the effect, so we think it was worth it. I'm not a garden designer, but I do know that the balance between mass and void is what you have to think about when you're looking at the design of your garden. Mass is trees, pots, sheds and borders, anything that looks three-dimensional in your garden, while the void is the flat bit, lawn, terrace, etc. It is really interesting to look at your garden and consider mass and void. Do try it. We decided to divide the garden where it naturally opens out, excavating a relatively formal parterre close to the house, but then opening out onto the lawn at the back. The parterre is about 40 feet square, and the back part of the garden is about 50 feet long and 80 feet wide. The 4 squares of the parterre with its central path echo the 4 square rooms of the house. Our hall is in the centre and the rooms are on either side. Originally this parterre just had paths and the central pot, but we decided the proportion of mass to void wasn't quite right, and I was inspired by this sunk garden in Doddington Place Gardens in Kent. I didn't think I had the space to include proper flower borders in our parterre, however, and nor do I have the time to look after any extra borders. So our version of these herbaceous borders are blocks of lavender, which I think look good at almost any time of year. However, on the back lawn, our decision was different. It wasn't design-led. There were several trees on the back lawn, and this took an awfully long time to mow. And my husband said he did not want to spend so long mowing the lawn. Now, mowing a lawn is quite good exercise, or you can pay someone to do it. But in this particular case, one of the things he wanted with the redesign of the garden was to cut down on the mowing costs. So we have a very large open lawn at the back. Now, in garden design terms, that is not the right balance of mass and void, but it works for us. and it has cut down the mowing by about half an hour. It's about half an hour he saves a week in the summer, and of course we mow much less in the winter. So once again, that is something that is I think worth thinking about. How much work is something going to be?
The other important element was both design-led and practical. Matt Jackson advised us to focus on what we wanted to see when we looked out of our windows. So our main flower bed is a big one directly outside the kitchen window, which we look out of several times a day, 365 days a year. So that's where I focus my gardening efforts and where I concentrate any time or money I spend on gardening. I try to make sure there's something to look at in this bed almost all year round. The beds around the edges of the garden are more low maintenance or neglected, whichever you prefer.
Then the other thing, obviously, particularly in a middle-sized garden, is you have to think about the cost of paths and paving. Because we were very lucky, the original terrace was a lovely size, so we kept the original terrace that our predecessors had put in. But we did create paths on the parterre, and we were able to find an Indian sandstone, but only for that part. The rest of it we had to use gravel, and we now use seashells. If your garden is really small, then actually you can probably spend quite a lot on a path because it's going to be quite a short path. If your garden is long, if it's 100 feet like this one, then actually it's going to be 5 times as much often to create a path. This is one of the reasons why I call this the Middlesized Garden blog and YouTube channel, is because if your garden is 60, 70, 80 feet long, if it is wider than say about 20 feet, then every time you do something, for example a terrace or a path, or you buy a sculpture, it's quite a big investment in money. If you have a small courtyard garden, you can probably actually spend much more per square foot than you can in a middle-sized garden. And if you have a large garden, you have the ability to have things like sheds and storage and ride-on mowers and greenhouses and things like that that can make life cheaper or easier or quicker. But in a middle-sized garden, it's a big battle between space and time and money. And so we have this very open lawn because it's quick to mow, and also we think, well, why not?
Although I arrived here knowing very little about gardens, I've been a journalist for almost all my professional life, working for magazines such as Good Housekeeping and Harper's and Queen, and writing for newspapers such as The Times and the Daily Telegraph. It's always been my job to find experts, to gather information, to filter it, to try it out, and to try and find the best advice for the reader, which in this case is me and everyone else whose garden is too small for a ride-on mower, but a bit too big when you're weeding it. And I also have to fit gardening into a busy life, so I garden in snatches and am always looking for time-saving or money-saving tips. So that's the journey that started out on the back of an envelope on a kitchen table and led to the Middlesized Garden blog and YouTube channel. I hope you'll join me on it, and please let me know what your gardening challenges are in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this, please do hit like, because then I'll know you'd like to see more garden tours and perhaps a bit more about garden design. So thank you for watching and Happy New Year. Goodbye.